The message came in the middle of the night. The human officer sat in his small cabin, half asleep, when the ship's console lit up red. A single line appeared on the screen. By order of Fleet Command, you are now in command of the warship Valkyra. He blinked twice, thinking it must be an error. He was not even a captain, just a low-ranking officer with no experience in leading a battleship. His hands shook as he reread the message, but the seal of Fleet Command glowed clear on the screen. It was not a mistake. He stood quickly, his heart racing. The corridors outside his cabin felt colder than usual, silent, except for the distant hum of engines. Other officers passed by, glancing at him strangely as if they already knew. Whispers followed him down the hall, whispers that made his chest heavy. He wanted to ask why, but no one stopped to explain. Instead, they saluted stiffly and walked away. His mind kept repeating the words, "You are now in command." When he reached the docking port of the Valkyra, he paused. The ship stood massive, a black shadow against the stars, far larger than anything he had stepped on before. Its armor reflected faint glimmers of light, and the front cannons looked like sleeping monsters waiting to wake. For a moment he thought about turning back, refusing the order, but he knew it was useless. Orders were orders. He placed his hand on the scanner, and the great door of the Valkyra hissed open. The sound inside was different from any ship he had known. The air carried a strange vibration, almost like a heartbeat, and the lights burned with a softer alien glow. He walked carefully through the main corridor, each step echoing against the steel floor. His boots felt heavy, as if gravity itself wanted him to hesitate. He could hear movements deeper inside, voices speaking in a language he did not understand, sharp and fast, almost like blades clashing. He swallowed hard. He had expected to meet engineers or human officers who would brief him, but the corridor remained empty until he reached the great hall. The door opened and he froze. Inside stood a crowd of warriors, but they were not human. They were tall, elegant, and fierce-looking, with armor that shimmered like liquid silver. Their skin carried strange shades of blue and violet, their eyes glowing faintly under the dim light. Each held a weapon, spears, blades, energy rifles, resting in strong hands, ready at a moment's call. They turned as one when he entered, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the breath from his chest. He felt hundreds of eyes studying him, cold and curious, as if he was a strange insect that had wandered into their nest. He wanted to speak, to say something commanding, but his throat was dry. He tried to stand tall, but inside he was trembling. He realized then that he was not giving in command of an ordinary warship. This was no human crew. These were alien warriors, and every single one of them was female. A tall warrior stepped forward, her armor marked with scars and symbols he did not recognize. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw set. She carried herself with pride, and her voice when she spoke was deep and strong. He did not understand her words, but the tone was clear. She was challenging him. The rest of the warriors murmured in agreement, their weapons shifting as if ready for battle. His heart pounded. He thought they might strike him down, reject him, and end his command before it began. His hand moved to his side instinctively, but he had no weapon that could help him here. Then, something unexpected happened. The tall warrior studied him for a long, tense moment. The air seemed to freeze, and then slowly she dropped to one knee. The sound of her armor hitting the steel floor echoed through the hall. The other warriors gasped one by one, their eyes widened, and whispers filled the chamber. He stood frozen, not sure what had just happened. The warrior had bowed, not in weakness, but in respect. And then others began to follow. Another knelt, then another, until the hall was filled with the sight of armored warriors lowering themselves before him. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I don't understand," he whispered, more to himself than to them. Yet the warriors looked up at him with burning eyes, not of doubt but of fierce loyalty. Something about him, something he did not know, had forced them to accept him. The silence broke with the sound of the ship's engines roaring to life. The hall vibrated beneath his feet. He looked around at the sea of alien warriors kneeling before him, realizing this was no ordinary command. This was a burden heavy enough to break him, or a chance that could change everything. His heart hammered in his chest. He was the commander of the Valkyra now, and this crew of beautiful, dangerous alien warriors was his to lead. The tall warrior raised her head, her voice ringing clear this time in broken human words. "We follow you, Captain." The sound sent a shiver down his spine. He could feel the weight of their eyes, their trust, and their unspoken challenge. He swallowed and tried to stand taller. He had no choice. The warship Valkyra was his command now, and his life would never be the same again. The hall remained heavy with silence after the warrior's voice faded. He stood frozen, still trying to understand what had just happened. The warriors had bowed, but the tension in their eyes told him it was not complete trust. It was something else, an uneasy acceptance, as if they were testing him, waiting for the first mistake to decide his fate. When he finally gathered courage to move, the sound of his boots echoed too loudly in the chamber. The alien warriors rose slowly, their movements sharp and disciplined, like blades drawn from sheaths. He could feel their eyes on him, cold and measuring, as if stripping away every weakness inside him. One warrior muttered in her language, her tone mocking, and the others laughed softly, the sound carrying more menace than humor. He clenched his fists, forcing himself not to show fear. He knew if he looked weak now, they would never obey him. He took a breath and said clearly, "I am your commander." His voice shook a little, but he held his ground. The words sounded small in the giant hall, yet they carried enough weight to make the laughter stop. The tall warrior with the scarred armor stepped closer, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She moved like a predator, slow and dangerous. She circled him, her expression unreadable, as if deciding whether to kill him or protect him. She finally stopped in front of him, raised her spear, and pointed it at his chest. The crew stirred, ready for violence. His heart pounded, but he did not move. He refused to step back. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then the warrior suddenly pulled the spear away and slammed its end against the floor. Sparks of light danced across the steel. She shouted something in her language, and the warriors answered with a roar, their voices shaking the hall. For a moment, he thought they had accepted him. But then another warrior, younger and hot-tempered, rushed forward. She pointed her blade at him and shouted, her tone sharp with anger. He could feel the hostility in her voice, even without knowing the words. She demanded proof. He realized this was a challenge. If he failed, they would tear him apart and strip him of command. He stared at the young warrior, and instead of drawing a weapon, he did something unexpected. He stepped forward until the blade touched his chest. Gasps filled the hall. "I will not fight my crew," he said firmly. "If you believe I am unworthy, strike me now." The young warrior's hand trembled. Her glowing eyes narrowed, but she could not strike. She lowered her blade slowly, confusion flashing across her face. The tall warrior watched in silence, then gave a small nod. For the first time, respect flickered in her expression. The hall fell quiet again, but the air was different now. The warriors no longer looked at him as prey. They looked at him with something sharper, something dangerous. Curiosity. They wanted to know what kind of human could stand before them without fear. He stood straighter, his pulse still racing, and forced himself to meet their eyes one by one. He could see suspicion, pride, and even contempt. But under it all, there was something else, a hint of loyalty, waiting to be earned. The ship's alarm suddenly blared, red lights flashing across the chamber. The warriors instantly turned, ready for battle, their weapons raised. He felt the floor rumble beneath him, the sound of cannons powering up. A voice came over the intercom, urgent and sharp. "Enemy ships approaching. Prepare for combat." All eyes turned back to him. The warriors waited, silent and still, their future hanging on his first command. The alarm's echo still rang through the warship when the stars outside filled with enemy fire. The hull shook, and a deep rumble passed through the floor as the first shot slammed into the shields. The alien warriors moved like lightning, rushing to their stations, voices sharp in their native tongue, but their glowing eyes kept darting back to him. They were waiting, testing, daring him to lead. He forced himself to stride to the command chair, though his legs felt heavy. The seat loomed like a throne, built not for a human, but for someone taller, broader, more powerful. When he sat, the metal felt cold against his back. The main screen lit up, showing enemy ships swarming like wolves, dozens of them circling, hungry for blood. His throat tightened. He had studied tactics, yes, but always from the safe distance of a classroom. This was different. Lives depended on his voice now. He gripped the armrest and shouted, "Shields to maximum! Engines to full power!" The words echoed in human tongue, and for a second he feared they wouldn't obey. Then the tall warrior repeated his order in her own language, and the crew moved. The ship groaned as power shifted, the engines roaring louder. On the screen, the enemy drew closer, their weapons glowing. The first volley hit. The ship lurched, sparks rained from a console, and smoke filled the air. The warriors hissed angrily, glaring at him as if asking, "What now, human?" His mind raced. He remembered a maneuver buried in the back of a manual. Risky, almost suicidal. He stood from the chair and pointed at the stars. "Cut engines, let them think we're crippled." The tall warrior narrowed her eyes but barked the order. The ship went still, drifting like wounded prey. Enemy vessels closed in, circling, ready to finish the kill. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Now," he shouted. "All engines, full reverse, fire every cannon forward." The Valkyra roared to life. Cannons spat fire brighter than the stars, tearing through the nearest enemy ships. The sudden reverse thrust threw the crew against their stations, but the trap worked. Half the enemy fleet erupted in explosions, burning debris spinning into the void. The warriors roared in triumph, their voices shaking the hall. For the first time, their eyes burned not with suspicion, but with excitement. They looked at him differently now, not as prey, not as an intruder, but as something dangerous. The tall warrior stepped closer, studying him as the smoke cleared. Her lips curled into the faintest of smiles, a smile edged with both respect and warning. She spoke softly in broken human words, just loud enough for him to hear. "Not weak," she said. "Maybe, Captain." The crew whispered among themselves, their sharp voices carrying strange tones he could not yet read. But he knew one thing for certain. In that moment, he was no longer a stranger sitting in their command chair. He was the one who had just saved them, and they would not forget it. The battle left the ship scarred but alive, the smell of smoke still heavy in the air. The warriors moved through the halls with the same sharp discipline, but now when their glowing eyes passed over him, there was no laughter, no mockery. There was a different weight, something between respect and suspicion, as if he had passed the first test, but not the last. He walked the corridors of the Valkyra, trying to memorize the paths, the strange runes etched into the walls, the soft pulse of alien light that guided the way. The ship felt alive, almost breathing, and every warrior who passed him saluted with a closed fist to the chest. But the gestures were stiff, formal, not yet born of loyalty. Late into the night cycle, the tall warrior who had first challenged him entered his quarters uninvited. Her presence filled the small room, her armor scratched from battle, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She said nothing at first. Tape had only studied him as if measuring his soul. Then, in halting human words, she spoke. "You wonder why we obey," she said. He nodded slowly. "I saved the ship. That is reason enough, isn't it?" Her laugh was low and bitter. "No, we do not kneel for victory. We kneel because of prophecy." The words struck him cold. He leaned forward, searching her face for mockery, but there was none. She sat across from him, removing her gauntlet, showing scars across her hand. "Long before you, it was written, a human would command the daughters of the Valkyra. A human would bring either our salvation or our end." He felt the blood drain from his face. Prophecies were myths, legends told to give meaning to war. But the way she said it, with the weight of belief carved into every syllable, made his chest tighten. "Why me?" he asked, almost a whisper. "Why not someone stronger, someone trained for this?" Her eyes narrowed, glowing brighter. "That is the riddle. Some believe you are the one who will doom us. Others believe you are the one who will save us. We wait. We watch. Every order you give decides which truth will come." Silence filled the room, pressing against him harder than any battle. The thought of carrying such a burden made his shoulders ache. He wanted to say he never asked for this, but he knew the words would mean nothing to her. The warrior stood, her armor gleaming in the faint light. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper near his ear. "Do not mistake our obedience for trust. Trust must be earned in blood." When she left, the door hissing shut behind her, he sat alone with the words echoing in his mind. The prophecy wrapped around him like chains. He had not just been given command of a warship. He had been tied to a fate that could decide the rise or fall of an entire warrior race. Sleep never came that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the alien warriors staring at him, waiting, measuring, deciding whether he was savior or destroyer. The mission came without warning. A distress signal pulsed through the void, sharp and urgent, dragging the Valkyra into hostile territory. The alien warriors gathered in the Great Hall, armor gleaming, weapons ready, their voices a low rumble of anticipation. All eyes turned to him when the signal map lit up the screen. An ambush was waiting. He could see it clearly, but retreat was not an option. He could feel their stares burning into his back, testing if he would lead them into fire or turn away in fear. He stood tall, though his heart raced, and gave the order to intercept. The ship roared forward, engines blazing, and soon they were swallowed in the trap. Enemy fighters poured in from every side, their formation perfect, their intent merciless. The warriors moved like lightning, but for the first time he was not only giving orders, he was at their side. He tore a rifle from the rack, the cold weight of it heavy in his hands, and joined the boarding team as enemy claws latched onto the hull. The corridors erupted into chaos. Sparks rained, steel split, and alien shrieks filled the air. The warriors fought like storms, blades flashing, voices raised in battle cries that shook the ship itself. He stumbled at first, unused to the rhythm of their combat, but then instinct took over. When one warrior was cornered by 3 attackers, he threw himself into the fight, tackling one aside and firing point blank. The heat of the blast burned his arm, but the warrior's life was saved. She looked at him in shock, her glowing eyes wide, before cutting down the last foe with renewed fury. Every step of the battle pulled him deeper into their world. He learned the rhythm of their voices, the signals hidden in their shouts, the way they fought not as individuals but as one living blade. He bled with them, shouted with them, and for the first time their eyes did not see a human outsider but a warrior in the line beside them. When the last enemy fell, silence swept the corridor. Stood, chests heaving, armor dented, blood streaking their faces, and they turned to him. The one whose life he had saved stepped forward, dropping to one knee. Her voice shook as she spoke in her language, but the meaning was clear. She had called him captain, not as a title, but as a bond. Others followed, not in mockery, not in prophecy, but in respect forged through fire. He felt it then, a connection deeper than command, a bond of trust sealed by survival. Yet even as the moment burned in his chest, he caught sight of something in the shadows, a warrior who had not bowed. Her eyes were cold, sharp, watching him with something darker than suspicion. When the others celebrated, she slipped away, silent as a blade. And for the first time he realized that not everyone on the Valkyra wanted him to succeed. Somewhere within the crew, betrayal waited, patient and hungry. The celebration did not last long. The Valkyra floated in silence after the battle, its halls echoing with the sound of repairs and the low hum of engines. He walked among the warriors, their salutes no longer stiff but sharp with respect, yet he could feel something else hiding in the air, a shadow crawling just out of sight. The prophecy's weight pressed on him, and he wondered if saving them had only delayed the moment of his downfall. It happened in the middle of the night cycle. His quarters were dim, the soft glow of alien lights pulsing like a heartbeat, when the door slid open without warning. A figure moved fast, silent as a predator. Cold steel pressed against his throat before he could rise from his bed. He froze, staring into the glowing eyes of one of the warriors. Her face was hard, her voice low and sharp, whispering words he could not fully understand. But the intent was clear. She meant to end him. He kept still, his breath shallow. The blade trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from conflict. She hissed in her language, calling him unworthy, a danger, a false leader. He tried to speak, to reach her, but her grip only tightened. For a moment, death felt certain. Then the door crashed open. The tall warrior stormed in, her spear flashing, knocking the blade aside before it could cut. The betrayer snarled, lunging like a wild beast, and the room exploded into violence. Armor clashed, sparks flew, and the 2 warriors fought with the fury of storms. He could only stumble back, heart racing, as the battle raged before his eyes. The tall warrior struck hard, her spear cracking against the traitor's blade, until finally she drove her opponent to the floor. The betrayer spat blood, eyes blazing with hatred, shouting curses in her tongue. Other warriors rushed in, seizing her, dragging her away in chains. Her screams echoed through the corridor, a promise that betrayal was not finished. When the hall grew silent again, the tall warrior turned to him. Her armor was scratched, her face shadowed, but her voice was calm. "Now you see," she said in broken human words. "Not all want you as captain. Some fear the prophecy. Some wish to end it by ending you." He stood in silence, the weight of her words pressing deeper than the blade at his throat ever had. He realized then that command was more than battles and victories. It was surviving the war inside his own crew. The next day, the Valkyra gathered in the great hall. The betrayer was brought before them, bound in chains, her eyes still defiant. The warriors stood in silence as judgment fell. They did not question the human captain's right to stand among them anymore. They demanded his word. His chest tightened as he looked at her, knowing every choice he made pulled him closer to the prophecy's promise of salvation or ruin. The sentence was carried out swiftly, the traitor's voice cut short by the weight of their law. The crew roared, their loyalty forged sharper by the blood of one of their own. Yet he could feel it deep inside. Her hatred was not gone. It lingered in the shadows, waiting, whispering. And beyond the stars, a greater danger was already approaching. The fleet of enemies gathering would test them all. The first sight of the enemy fleet filled the Valkyra's screen like a black sea, endless and merciless. Hundreds of warships, their hulls glowing red, their weapons already armed. The crew stood frozen for a moment, their battle cries caught in their throats. Even the tall warrior's eyes narrowed with doubt. No one expected to face such impossible numbers. All turned toward him, waiting for his command, their silence louder than any alarm. He gripped the armrest of the command chair, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to retreat, to flee into the dark, but the prophecy's weight held him steady. If this was the end, he would not run. His voice cut through the hall like steel. "We fight." The words spread through the crew like fire. The warriors slammed their fists to their chests, their voices rising in a war cry that shook the walls of the ship. The Valkyra roared forward, plunging into the storm. Enemy fire lit the void, turning the black of space into a blazing furnace. Shields cracked under the assault, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, but the warriors did not falter. They moved with the fury of storms, their weapons singing, their voices a single thunderous chant. He stood among them, giving orders sharp and fearless, his voice carrying through the chaos. At the heart of the battle, he made the choice no one else would. He ordered the Valkyra into the jaws of the fleet, straight toward the flagship. The crew obeyed without hesitation, their trust absolute. The engines screamed, the ship shuddered, and the enemy closed in like beasts circling prey. Then came the strike. Cannons unleashed every shot in one blinding storm, tearing through the flagship's shields, ripping its heart open in a burst of fire. The explosion rocked the fleet, scattering their formation, throwing their perfect order into chaos. For the first time, the impossible seemed winnable. The warriors roared, their eyes blazing with a fire that mirrored his own. They fought not just for survival now, but for him. He had become more than a commander. He was their bond, their proof, their living answer to the prophecy. Hours passed in blood and fire until silence finally returned. The battlefield floated with burning wreckage, enemy ships fleeing into the dark. The Valkyra drifted scarred and battered, but alive. The crew stood in the great hall, armor cracked, weapons stained, yet their heads were high. The tall warrior stepped forward, her voice carrying through the chamber. "No more prophecy," she said, her words steady, her gaze fierce. "We know the truth. You are our captain." One by one, the warriors dropped to their knees, not in fear, not in ritual, but in loyalty. The sound of armor striking the steel floor echoed like thunder. He stood above them, exhausted, bloodied, yet unbroken. For the first time, he felt not the weight of chains, but the strength of belonging. The Valkyra had a new future, carved in fire and trust, and the human who should never have commanded them now stood at their heart, not as a mistake, not as a prophecy, but as the captain who had turned death into victory.